I was the biggest Digimon fan back in the day. I was at the ripe old age of 11 when Digimon first appeared in the States. Pokemon fever was in full swing, and I, like everyone my age, was obsessed with catching them all. Pokemon eventually became such a massive phenomenon that most schools ended up banning all Pokemon stuff entirely as it began to interfere with regular school activities. This sucked because the most fun thing to do at recess, and the only thing anyone was really doing at the time, was trading Pokemon cards and battling in the Game Boy game. Suddenly, the central focus of all our young lives was gone, and no one really knew what to do. In what is still one of my most amazing accomplishments, I sat down with the principal and was able to convince him to re-allow Pokemon in schools, at least for another 3 weeks before someone fucked it up for everybody. At that point, it was clear that something new needed to come and replace Pokemon at school, and I had just the idea. Another big thing in the late 90s was Tamagotchis, these little virtual pets that you raised. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, so I don't really need to go into detail describing them. What came out almost immediately after was a variant of Tamagotchi that could connect and fight with each other, called Digimon. Monsters that you raised and battled with each other? That wasn't Pokemon? I had found my loophole. Digimon exploded at my elementary school. Kids ended up buying 3 or 4 of the things to have a team of monsters just like you would in Pokemon. I can only imagine how livid my principal must have been. That summer, I'm sitting watching Fox Kids and they have a commercial for a new show coming on that looks a lot like Pokemon. It looked really cool. The art style was striking, the characters and monsters were all really colorful. Visually, I immediately thought it looked even cooler than Pokemon. It certainly had a lot more detail. Then the title of the show popped up. I flipped my shit. The little V-Pets that I unleashed on my school as a poor man's Pokemon was getting their own show? In my simplistic 11-year-old psyche, I was convinced that it was my proliferation of Digimon that had brought the show to the States, and I couldn't fucking wait to check it out. And holy shit did Digimon deliver. Say what you will about Pokemon. The games were fantastic. The card game was deep and rewarding. It was a ton of fun. But the show was never the best part of the phenomenon. Even as little kids, we were all always making fun of Ash for his boneheaded decisions, not ever really focusing on catching lots of Pokemon, which was the entire point of the game. Everyone I knew, even back then, was convinced that if it could ever happen, they could kick Ash's butt in a Pokemon battle. Digimon, on the other hand, was a fucking adventure. It was one of, if not the, first show I started watching with a single continuous storyline, each episode picking up right where the last left off, the entire series spanning a continual experience of these 6, and later 7, characters and their Digimon partners. And the fact that the Digimon were actually characters was such a strength of this show. They didn't just say their name, they had actual conversations with their human partners. They had far clearer thoughts and feelings than Pokemon ever could. You could relate to them, you can get invested in their own struggles. They had struggles of their own to begin with. They weren't just an extension of their trainer's desires, essentially a living tool, they were a friend, and their character grew and developed right alongside their human partner. And the fact that the stakes in Digimon from the very beginning were just so much higher. I mean, the characters are in life or death scenarios from episode 1, and their Digimon fight to protect their lives from danger, not for sport or merit, and this led to a much more powerful narrative that examined strong themes like friendship, trust, love, loyalty, and even things like betrayal and facing your own mortality. The main cast fought with each other, and not just over paying for a bike, but over serious slights that would last multiple episodes and permanently affect these characters' relationships going forward. The show just had some seriously powerful moments, even looking back on it now with adult perspectives. I mean, that fucking episode where Tai goes back to the real world, holy shit! Digimon was unquestionably the best show I had ever seen in my life up until that point. And not just from an enjoyment perspective, but in objective quality. It blew my fucking mind into a million goddamn pieces, and I was hooked from the very first second. My stand-in for Pokemon quickly took center stage, and I traded my Pokedex in for a Digivice basically overnight. And even watching it now, especially the subbed version that isn't censored like the Fox Kids release was, it's still very watchable, as long as you're okay with some resonant themes mixed in with very blatant silliness.
I close the show with a tune that's currently #1 on the charts. It goes something like this. My little darling, yeah, you think you're swell, you think you're cool. The Digi-Dudes will Digi-Rule with Digi-Ability and Digi-Tool.
Are more friends coming over? I'll make 3-bean salad.
Nobody's coming over, Mom.
Oh, that's all right. I only have 2 beans anyway.
This is Ty.
You're selling ties?
No, my name is Ty.
You two are the best friends I ever had.
We're the only friends you've had.
Digimon had quite a few seasons in its run. Initially, the first 2 seasons were directly connected, with Season 2 aging up the cast a few years and having them take a backseat to a new cast of characters, the original chosen children working in a mentor role. As a kid, I was pretty bummed that they didn't return as main characters, though they start playing a bigger role as that series continued. After that, the series reset, and from then on would feature a new lore and new premise with each season. Despite later watching Season 3 and quickly becoming my favorite season overall, which would be a great topic for a future video, my interest in Digimon as a kid waned once Tai, Matt, Izzy, Sora, Mimi, TK, and Kari left the picture. The characters were the best part of Digimon, and I wasn't really ready to see them go. Eventually, though, I let Digimon fade away into the annals of my own personal history. I got into Toonami, watching things like Dragon Ball, Gundam, and Outlaw Star, moving on to anime aimed at a slightly older audience, before inevitably moving online and watching subs for shows as they came out. But I never forgot the original Digimon and what a massive impact it had on my life, and how it really kind of set the stage for a lot of what I enjoy in fiction that continues to this day. And then this happened. Oh my god! I cannot explain in words the emotional reaction this elicited from me. I teared up. I got chills. I lost my goddamn shit. It was like reuniting with an old friend you hadn't thought about in years and thought you'd never see again, despite occasionally wondering how they were doing, only to run into them out of the blue, saying they were doing better than ever and were just as excited to catch up with you. The announcement of Digimon Tri sent me into a fucking frenzy. The little kid came out of hiding and took over again. The scenario I'd wanted since I was 11 was happening. Digimon was coming back, with the original cast center stage. So, after that insanely long-winded introduction, how is the first part of Digimon Tri? It's pretty good. Honestly, it's still pretty hard to say much about this series because it isn't complete yet. Only the first 4 episodes have been released, and I guess they're being released in chunks theatrically in Japan or something? I don't know. As such, the 4 episodes really don't do much aside from reintroducing the main cast and bring us up to speed on what they've been doing for the last couple years, as they're all in high school now, and tease us with the villain for this arc, as well as introduce a new character. Visually, Tri takes Digimon in a new direction. The original 2 seasons of Digimon had a very unique art style, with extremely large eyes, even for anime standards, exaggerated proportions, and a weird, sort of bespeckled coloring style for the environments as a way of differentiating the digital world from the real. It was, in my opinion, quite beautiful. Tri reins things in a bit and plays it a lot more restrained. It uses more realistic proportions, which does make sense since the characters are a lot older now, and even in the original, adults had more realistic proportions, and while still colorful, it doesn't pop in quite the exact same way. Though, all of the episodes so far take place in the real world, so they may adopt a different visual style like the original did when they inevitably end up in the digital world. Visually, the human characters look a lot more reserved and generic compared to the original series aesthetics. However, the Digimon are about as spot on as one can expect, their visual language a dead ringer for the originals. In terms of animation, the trailers leading up to the show got me really excited, as it looked like there were lots of dynamic action scenes, and even the Digimon themselves drawn with dynamic line weight, something that was never done in the original. In practice, though, though, while there are some standout scenes, a lot of the stuff in between carries a bit of awkward stiltedness for reasons I can't really put my finger on. It's not bad per se, but it's less than what was advertised and in my opinion, not up to the original's pedigree. I can't help but think this might be due to budget constraints on the part of Toei, who owns the Digimon license and animated this series. With their recent debacles with both Dragon Ball Super and Sailor Moon Crystal, it's clear they don't really care about their big gun franchise to give them the budget and care they deserve. Don't take my word for it though, because this is all speculation on my part. I didn't go out of my way to look any of this up. I'm not Digibro. The fight scenes, though, were really well done. Being able to see the evolution scenes redone with modern animation was really cool, and the fact that they kept the CGI for Matt and Ty's warp evolutions was a great nod to the original series. While the visuals are merely passable, the real reason I loved Digimon as a kid was the characters and the adventures that they went on. So that's really what's gonna make or break Tri in my book, so let's examine that for a second. Like I touched on earlier, this is just the setup for the arc of Digimon Tri. So as a result, nothing really happens just yet, with things only really getting started right at the end of episode 4. This chunk of Tri served to reacquaint ourselves with these characters and see how they've changed and how they stayed the same. There are tons of fantastic little bits of characterization and moments littered throughout the beginning of Tri that makes all these characters feel like the original Chosen Children, even if they don't really look like all of them to a T. Some standout moments are the entirety of Ty's soccer team instantly fawning over Kari when she pops in to bring Ty lunch, the fact that Izzy goes off on a technobabble ramble that continues unabated in the background as the rest of the characters ignore him and have a completely different conversation, and more. I don't want to spoil them all here because they provide a lot of Tri's appeal, so I'll leave it at that. There are even some more somber elements that reflect how things have changed for these characters. It seems like Tri wants to at least subtly address the fact that the Chosen Children are growing up, and that encroaching adulthood is affecting the cast differently. Ty, for example, is completely directionless and unsure what he wants to do with life, still hung up with the freedom his time in the digital world allowed, despite his friends mostly moving on and accepting their more humble futures. Joe is actually shown struggling with his grades in cram school despite being previously characterized as an excellent and diligent student. And everyone in general just seems to be slowly drifting apart as their lives become more complex and headed in different directions. These are all some really interesting seeds that Tri plants that Digimon hasn't explored before with these characters. If they capitalize on it, we could be in for some great moments later down the road. There were other aspects I enjoyed a bit less, however. A running thread throughout the first part of Tri is that Ty is becoming hesitant to commit to action when faced with Digimon invading the real world again, his older perspective allowing him to truly consider the consequences giant monsters fighting has on the surrounding area and the people in it. The show slows down a few times during the action scenes to show Ty taking in the collateral damage, which weakens his resolve. This actually ends up initially affecting Agumon and getting him hurt, as his strength is completely reliant on Ty's will. Conversely, Matt looks at the situation from the bigger picture perspective, choosing to focus instead on the damage prevented by their intervening than what inevitably comes to pass from the conflict itself. They of course butt heads over this, which ends in another classic Ty versus Matt confrontation. As much as I appreciate the Matt and Ty fight, and don't get me wrong, I like the concept, especially the payoff scene with Agumon, which is both visually beautiful and emotionally moving, I can't help but feel that this is retreading ground for Ty a bit. As much as I can appreciate him not wanting to get civilians involved in his Digimon's conflicts, I mean, he fought Venom Myotismon in the middle of the city years ago, doing much more damage than anything that's happened in Tri thus far. He knows what the stakes are here and the consequences of not taking action and letting Digimon run amok. As a longtime viewer of this series, I don't think you can side with Ty on this at all. Matt is clearly in the right here, and by all accounts, Ty should be too, as interesting a perspective his position is in isolation. Not to mention, Ty and Matt have fought multiple times before, and it was all done for far better and more believable stakes near the end of the first season. Maybe it's just cause it's kind of a tradition at this point. Matt and Ty are friends despite, and perhaps because, they approach situations from different perspectives, and I can certainly appreciate that, but this conflict just felt forced on Ty's part, regressing his character a bit. Writing this paragraph out did give me a bit more appreciation for what they were going for. I just still don't know if I'm a fan of the framing or execution. Not a massive point, but something I noticed nonetheless. My biggest concern, though, comes from the new character that Tri introduces right at the tail end of episode 4. We still don't really know anything about her, but my fanfic insert alarms were going off full blast the second she showed up on screen. From getting special attention and protection from both Matt and Ty, having some knowledge that the main cast doesn't, to seemingly being the typical quiet, reserved, shy girl that is still subtly pretty and important, and her just appearing out of nowhere, it just kinda came off to me as something out of a fanfic rather than an official production. It's way too early to tell or make judgments, but I'm just calling it as I see it. We'll have to wait and see. So, overall, the first part of Digimon Tri is slow but promising, a beginning to something I've wanted for over 15 years now. Getting to see the original Chosen Children and their Digimon take center stage was a nostalgia trip, the likes of which I haven't experienced in a long time. I'm very excited to see where the story goes from here, and I'll be back to talk about it some more when part 2 drops in March. As a final point, I really do hope this eventually gets a US dub. Joshua Seth, the US voice for Tai, has already stated he'd reprise his role if this series gets localized. Bringing the vocal cast back, even just partially, would really bring the nostalgia bomb back in full force and probably elevate Tri to an even higher level than it occupies right now. Before I go, I just want to say thank you to all my patrons who support me here on Patreon that make videos like this possible. I wouldn't be able to make stuff like this without you guys' help, so I really appreciate the fact that you continue to support me and the videos that I create. If you guys like this video, you like what I do, and want to help keep stuff like this coming out, and join this list with all the other great people, hit the link in the description to check out my Patreon. Anything you can do for me is highly, highly appreciated. Thanks to everyone on this list and Twisted Prism who edited this video for me far better than I could. If you see any of these guys' names in the comments, give them some love. Without them, this wouldn't have happened. So that's all I got for this video. Give it a thumbs up if you thought it was good, or give it a thumbs down if you thought it friggin' sucked. Digimon was a huge part of my childhood, and I gushed at length about it. But what about you? Digimon didn't have the staying power that Pokemon had, so after its big moment, it kind of faded into the background for a while. So I'm sure for a lot of you guys that are younger, you probably are not all that familiar with Digimon, or at least don't have the same experience I do. Sound off in the comments below what you think of Digimon. And if you're an old school fanboy like me, who did you want to be your Digimon partner back in the day? Personally, I was always a fan of Elecma's design, so I figured I'd have one of those. Till next time, I'm Tommy Oliver. Stay curious.